Welcome back to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where two of our three alma maters won this weekend, and I feel like it's a little different than maybe we would have expected. We have Sean Keeley here from Awful Announcing. I'm Brendon Kleen, though. I'm a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Sean is the managing editor of our wonderful website here, and we are back for another week. We have lots and lots of football to talk about. Was this week the beginning of the end for Tom Brady, or are we already there? Plus, much to break down from the football weekend with the debut of our news segment, Stockwatch, which we will explain when we get there. You can weigh in on my pot shot there, Ben, but also I'm with the two foremost experts on Tom Brady. You guys have both weighed in on, at least as a Fox analyst here, you guys have both weighed in on Brady along the way of this month, this season, gone pretty in depth. Ben, where should we start? What is this moment in Tom Brady? Where are we with Brady 3 months in and about 2 months from calling a Super Bowl here?
Well, first of all, I thought you were going to say you were with the foremost experts on Kyle McCord, but I guess we'll get to that in a little bit too while we're talking Syracuse football. But as far as Tom Brady, this feels like a pretty big line in the sand. This feels like a point we're going to look back on, and if Tom Brady's one and done, or if something happens and he decides to call it quits as a broadcaster, I think we're going to look back at his first and what might be his only Thanksgiving game as a point of no return. It was the point I gave up on Tom Brady. I mean, I picked Tom Brady first overall in our NFL broadcasters draft with Drew Lerner, 6 weeks ago, and I'm out on him now. So I just thought that it was a very clear point where it was obvious this isn't working, that Tom Brady is not a top tier level NFL broadcaster, that even if he's passable, it's just too distracting to have Tom Brady in there. Everything he says is going to be a headline. He's not somebody we want to hear from when it comes to analyzing games while they're happening and criticizing quarterbacks and things of that nature. So I just thought that Thanksgiving was a pretty clear point of hey, Tom Brady, the broadcaster, just wasn't meant to be.
So Sean wrote something about Tom Brady getting a pass, and I almost feel like that dynamic, where you fall on whether you are giving him a pass or how much you want to hear what he has to say, is kind of what this whole conversation is really boiling down to. But you say, Ben, you're done with him. Is it just because of this comment about Daniel Jones and the scout team safety thing that L. Duncan kind of stepped in it with, and that he sort of took an odd position on? Is it just that, or were there other things on that Thanksgiving game that was about as awful a matchup as he could have asked for?
I think that what he said about Daniel Jones, and for the uninitiated, it would be odd if you were listening to this podcast and weren't aware of what we were talking about. But I think that Tom Brady, they were talking about Daniel Jones because the Giants were playing, and he said, went on one of his rants about basically Daniel Jones being a bad teammate and how he would never, leave his teammates hanging high and dry by asking for his release. And I just think that comment exemplified why Tom Brady wasn't meant to be a broadcaster, because I think that's actually a comment that another broadcaster could say, and everyone would be applauding him and being like, oh yeah, this guy's a team player and he roots for his teammates and he sticks by his teammates. And when you hear Tom Brady say it, you just kind of roll your eyes. It feels disingenuous. You don't want to hear that kind of comment from Tom Brady. And I think it gets to, when I took Tom Brady first overall, my argument was the star power, and that he had unprecedented star power, and that if he's even passable, that he's a no-brainer number one overall pick. But I got that wrong. I think his star power is a detriment to him in the broadcast booth, because everything he says is going to get met with that eye roll, get met with that scrutiny. And it's not only even that, it's not talking about Daniel Jones. It's him talking about Drew Lock and saying what he would do if he were Drew Lock. You're not Drew Lock. You're Tom Brady. We don't need to hear what Tom Brady thinks about below average quarterbacks, because we know Tom Brady doesn't have the perspective of a below average quarterback. And so I just thought that whole Thanksgiving game, from it being a matchup between Drew Lock and Cooper Rush to the comment about Daniel Jones, I felt like it really exemplified on top of the ownership stuff where he can't even meet with teams before the game as a traditional broadcaster would. I just thought this whole experience kind of exemplified why he's not cut out for this.
Yeah, I want to get to a comment he made about the ownership thing on Bryson DeChambeau's podcast recently, but that's a little more forward looking. Sean, I tend to agree with Ben that the over looking into and over listening to Brady works against him. But you wrote something that at least I kind of took as the opposite, which is that people are maybe handling him with kid gloves a little bit. What did you mean when you wrote about Tom Brady kind of getting a pass or being handheld a little bit in his first year?
Well, I think there's a few things going on.
Also, you can talk your shit about Syracuse at any point. That's all fair game.
We'll get there. Don't worry.
Okay.
Let me talk about Tom Brady, who lost to Syracuse while he was the quarterback at Michigan.
Beautiful.
First. A couple things that really stick out to me. One, there was that time frame kind of right before the season started where everybody was, including us, was kind of positing like, how's Tom Brady going to do? Is he going to be able to do this? And I remember seeing a lot of very strong defenses of him of like, not only is he going to be good at this, he's going to be amazing at this. And like everybody who's pre-criticizing him, you're a loser and you don't know what you're talking about. And like, this is Tom Brady. He's going to be great. And I think that kind of set a bad tone for me, at least, where I didn't quite understand why people were going to bat for him so hard instead of just letting it play out. And then, we had that first week where he really did not do that well. And Ben, you wrote about that. And then he had the second week and it was a little bit better. And I remember that second week, and I wrote about this in my piece last week, that I think maybe he got a little over harsh criticism that first week, but then I felt like he got overpraised the second week, where it was like, oh, actually he did a okay job. Like, see, we all knew Tom Brady was going to be amazing at this. And it's like, no, he was fine. And, and he's kind of, as the season has gone on, if you've listened to him, it's not like he's going up there and speaking gibberish and doesn't know what, how to talk into a microphone. Like he's competent. Like he knows how to do that. There's just nothing coming out of his broadcasts that makes you understand why he is worth the money that Fox is paying to him, other than the fact that he is Tom Brady. And, you can get into the whole, are announcers worth it? Do people tune in for announcers? I would argue that people tune in for good, or they pay attention to good announcers and they appreciate good announcers more than they think they do. And on the flip side, I think you notice when the announcer is kind of either detracting or just not adding any value to your broadcast. And I would say that Tom Brady doesn't really add value to the broadcast right now. And I think in general, when you look around at the sports media world, I don't feel like a lot of people are really being honest about it. I think if his name wasn't Tom Brady, and you just listen to his broadcasting, you'd be like, this is the number 4, number 5 guy on the Fox broadcasting crew. Like there's a reason he's there, and like and that would be it. But I think, because he's Tom Brady and because there's, we have this kind of media landscape of there's the backlash and the backlash to the backlash, and you've got people who want to instinctively kind of move against what the narrative might be. I think you do have a lot of people who are kind of just giving him a pass, but quite frankly. And maybe that'll pay off for him down the road. There's a chance he could walk away at the end of this year. I don't think Fox is going to kick him out by any means. Like they're probably still happy with him. And so I don't know. I think it's a work in progress. It reminds me of the Tony Romo narrative and conversation of last year, where there was a moment where people were wondering, like, is this it for Tony Romo? And like he has his quirks and his weird things, but no, like it's the argument was a bit louder than the reality, and I think that's maybe the case here.
So why do we think Brady's being treated like, I mean, I agree with you, and some of it maybe is just like we want to have something to talk about, and to continue to say that he's not very good at this every week gets a little bit monotonous for a guy that we built up so much heading in. But I mean, how is it that this guy who's the best at playing football gets talked about more patiently and more gently than Jason Witten or any number of other people? Why do you think that that's how it's gone, Ben?
I don't know, because I think I guess I wouldn't necessarily agree that he gets treated that patiently by everybody, because I posted my review, which was very negative. I mean, the headline was Tom Brady is not built to be a broadcaster, or Tom Brady's not a fit for broadcasting. And like, it was a pretty split, like a lot of approval and a lot of detractors on it. So I think he's very polarizing. I think he was polarizing entering this season. In terms of why he would get treated with kid gloves, I think because he's Tom Brady. I think there are people who want it to work.
Yeah.
And so maybe they're wish casting, and the idea of Tom Brady like being this awesome broadcaster is appealing to people. I think maybe there's some contrarian takes about it, because there has been a lot of like, hey, Tom Brady's not going to be good. And I think overwhelming.
And he's like the most hateable athlete in that sport.
Right.
Of the century, right? Like, if you were a fan of any of the other 31 teams, you just probably hate him, period. And he has to win you over. So if you're just a casual person turning on a game, you're kind of coming at it from that standpoint.
And the other part of it, which is like, I think the funniest part, or the one of the more interesting angles, is the contrast with Greg Olsen, who's not this big time, former quarterback star. He's kind of a pseudo journeyman tight end, but he pretty quickly rose to be like I'd say has the highest approval rating of any color commentator in football today, at least on the NFL level. And so the fact that Tom Brady replaced him, that added a whole new layer to this conversation. And I also think it's kind of telling, do TV executives think like I did when it came to our broadcasters draft, or are they looking for, are they looking for a broadcast that's going to be critiqued positively? And so I think that's another angle to it as well.
Well, and what are fans wanting, right? Like, what do people want from Brady? I think is part of the question that I've been kind of trying to tease out. And I think we need the Athletic. I don't know if Chris Vanini can just handle this, but we need an Athletic NFL fan survey to talk about all these things, because I would be very curious to hear and see, especially over time, how some of this changes. Like, I don't know who the guy with the best appreciation among the average NFL fan is right now. Probably the people who have been around the longest. Maybe you're just looking at like Aikman and Collinsworth, because people are just sort of used to that by now. That was sort of how the college football ones seemed to play out, is the most just traditional guys kind of had the highest approval rating. But I think he has gotten better. I think Tom Brady has gotten better. Like, the people who say that, I happen to agree with them. I think that, of course, compared to that first game where he was stumbling through sentences and just the rhythm and timing of everything was absolutely off, he, of course, is miles better than that. But he can't get better at the thing that holds him back the most, which is that he's not a personable, relatable, entertaining, naturally smooth speaker and entertainer. He just isn't. He never will be. He is closer to his now colleague Mark Davis than Greg Olsen. And there's no way around that, right? Like, that is just the company that he keeps. That is the people that he probably spends the most time talking to about football and everything else. Like, I watched this Bryson interview, and even Bryson DeChambeau, who is, of course, not at the level of Brady in golf or anything close, but closer than Kevin Burkhardt is to Brady's level, and he can't even get through a normal conversation in a situation like that. We've seen interviews, Colin Cowherd, Stephen A. Smith, tons of people. Like, that's not changing. There's no way around that part of it. And so I asked you guys I asked you, Ben, like, why is he getting handled this way, and maybe what do people want and whatever else. I feel like the hype around him is exactly the problem. If he could just settle in, I think that would at least help help it feel more natural. It could at least incrementally make him better at the biggest obstacle, which is that he's not all those things I just said. And until maybe if he does come back for multiple years, it just gets more normal and he's not focused on so much and he can just kind of do his thing, and that helps that element of him come along. But right now, it's like the only times where he really shines are these big moments, are these I'm giving my thoughts on the Daniel Jones thing right now. I'm ready to go. I'm doing a podcast while the play is dead. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's not what the job really is to me. That's like designed to go viral almost or something. So until he can just be a good broadcaster and be naturally entertaining, I just don't see this thing getting better. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I wonder if the Baker Mayfield thing was, it probably seemed like they struck gold with that, where it was like, oh, here's, perfect opportunity for Tom Brady to be Tom Brady and respond to this and like get in a zinger. And I think maybe they took the wrong lessons from that. And they were kind of like, we want you to like give your big Tom Brady opinion on the news of the day. And yeah, like you said, like that's not the job. The job is, how do you make the broadcasting, the experience for me as a fan watching the game at home, how do you improve that experience through your analysis and the way you broadcast, and how that informs my enjoyment of the game. And so, yeah, like people, that was the big argument beforehand, was like, should he be in the broadcast booth or should he be in a studio? And I think the answer is probably he should be in the studio. Like that's where he can go do that stuff. And that, he would thrive in that scenario where he's in the studio, he's doing a sit down interview, or he's like out before the game, chatting with players and doing personable stuff like that. And, talking shop with Strahan and those guys. And I don't know, I think he would, if it was him and not his hologram in the studio with them, I think it would be a better fit. That said, we all know why he's in the booth. We all know why he's on the A team. We all know why he's not going to get what you mentioned, Brendon, that he would have benefited so much from being like on the 4th or 5th team for a year or two and just like cutting his teeth and, maybe working a college football game or two, or, just throw a bunch of different scenarios at him and let him become an actual analyst, a broadcaster, rather than like throwing him out there with all this hype, in a way, like revealing himself to be a mediocre broadcaster who's just kind of middle of the road is, probably the most likely thing that was going to happen. And in a weird way, the worst case scenario.
Well, he didn't even call like a preseason game. Like I feel like Fox made this thing so precious. Like, oh my God, we have to save Tom Brady's big debut for a Dallas Cowboys week 1 matchup, that it's like, they only added to that hype. They only added to those expectations. But I think what you said about being in the studio, I think that's right. Because I wasn't working at Awful Announcing when this deal first got announced in 2022, but like, it was fairly shocking, right? That Tom Brady was going to call games and be Fox's #1 analyst, because this is not the type of role you see for these type of players. I mean, we didn't see Kobe Bryant in a broadcast booth. We didn't see Michael Jordan in a broadcast booth. And if we did, as much novelty as there would be initially, I think it would get old really quickly. And even
those guys who in various sports who have done it are usually bad at it.
Right.
So
and that's
we should have known, right?
Yeah, I mean, even somebody who I think like Charles Barkley probably has the highest approval rating, or one of the highest approval ratings among ex-athletes turned media members. If he was in the broadcast booth, it would be totally different than what he's doing from a studio perspective. So I guess, like, Sean, you said we all know why he's in the booth. I really don't know why he's in the booth, because if you had him in the studio, you could still have him in pregame before the Super Bowl. You could still have him postgame after the Super Bowl. Like, he could still be one of the central stars of your presentation without having this awkward thing where he's clearly in a role that he's just not meant for as a game analyst.
Well, the reason that this happened, I think, to remember is that this was a Lachlan Murdoch deal. This was Lachlan Murdoch saying, like, I'm throwing the gauntlet down. I'm paying for this guy. And I'm telling Fox Sports, now you're going to go do what I want you to do with this. So, whereas
speaking of people who Brady relates more to than the average football fan, right? I mean,
yeah. Whereas, like, if Brady had come in through the usual channels, there probably would have been more hand-holding and more like, hey, we want you to succeed. Here's how we want to, like, build you up, and we're going to do all this stuff to get you there. When, you know, the boss of the boss of the boss tells you this is what we're doing, that's what you're doing. And I think that was the problem that then created all the other problems.
Well, we talked about the media, people like us kind of handling him with kid gloves, and that's happened to some degree. I think Bill Simmons ripped him pretty good a few weeks ago, which, you know, it's Bill Simmons on the Patriots legend. That's going to break through, and I think it did, but a lot of the people have. And I think the other people that have handled him with kid gloves is Fox. I mean, it sounds like they're not letting him, or they're not actively making him available for interviews with the various podcasts that do those types of interviews. Jim Nantz and Tony Romo just did a big one where they were pretty transparent about, yeah, Romo gets crushed. What do we think about that? Blah, blah, blah. There's no such thing for Brady this whole year. He was supposed to be on Colin Cowherd's show a bunch. I think we're at a grand total of 1 appearance on the Herd so far this season. He has this weird digital presence where he does like a top 5 thing every week. He does like stuff that I don't think anybody's really seeing, frankly, but it's out there on like Fox's website and their YouTube channel. He does the LFG Player of the Week thing that they try to pump up, and he does some interviews with the players, the hologram stuff, but he is not really front and center, I think, even in the ways that they could be really maximizing him. And I think that speaks to this kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out nature of it. But I mean, just to echo what you guys are saying, as far as the nuts and bolts of him doing the job, something like this Daniel Jones moment, the Baker Mayfield thing, I think you're absolutely right, Sean, that they learned the wrong lessons from it. Because when I think of a player taking me into how they are seeing something, it's not so direct. It's not literally Tom Brady. It's like guy who happened to be a legendary quarterback. I don't really care that you played for the Bucs and the Patriots so much, or which Super Bowls you won, or what era you even really played in. It's that I just want to know what a person like you is thinking in this moment. And when I listen to Greg Olsen, yeah, there's times where he's like, oh, it's hell to block Aaron Donald or whatever. But most of the time, it's just like he's going to break down why a guy running a route was really good, better than anybody else can, just because he happened to be a great pass catcher, not because he's Greg Olsen. You know what I mean? And so I think that's kind of what we're running into. And I get the instinct to be like, well, but it is Tom Brady. It is the guy who did all these things that every football fan knows and has a direct emotional and memory tie to. But I think less of that would actually be better. But that brings us to the future. And I'll read the quote that Brady gave Bryson on the Break 50 podcast that he does on his YouTube channel. He said, being a broadcaster has been amazing. But also knowing beyond that, I get to be involved in the sport I love for the rest of my life and try to impact the game in a positive way and call out what I like, what I don't like. He was speaking about his Raiders ownership and the impact that he can have on that organization in a more hands-on way since that purchase of the stake was approved in October. He wasn't quite using the past tense there, but he was almost using the past tense. This dude is not quite 50. He just started a 10-year deal. And he's already kind of, it's almost like when your grandparents start talking about retirement and where they're going to move. You know what I mean? Like it'll be really good to be around the beach a little more, and you guys should come out and see it. It definitely had that kind of vibe to it. So, Ben, we've done this periodically throughout the season. Are you still one and done with Mr. Brady here?
Yeah, and that quote I think is probably helps exemplify why. And You said he's kind of talking about broadcasting in the past tense. It sounds like he's talking about ownership, like in the future tense, but he's actively an owner, right? Like he is already the part owner of the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think that's the other part of this that I don't know if it just rubbed people the wrong way or if there's something to the idea that these restrictions are really prohibitive from allowing him to fully do his job as a broadcaster. But everybody like with experience doing broadcasting, and Tiki Barber talked about it with regard to the Daniel Jones comments, says that this is not sustainable. Like that you cannot have one hand in the ownership drawer and one hand in the broadcasting drawer, like that you have to pick one or the other. And so I think that the fact that he does speak about, ownership so glowingly shows you which one he prefers. And when push inevitably comes to shove, he's going to choose ownership every time. And so I just think I feel I was throwing out one year, like just as like one of my like hot takes when we started this podcast, that Tom Brady would be one and done in the broadcast booth. I feel like strongly about it now. I would be really stunned if he's back at Fox next year.
Sean.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite ready to commit to one and done, but I do think I would put solid money that there's absolutely no way he makes it 10 years. No way. It reminds me of a video essay I saw, I think it was Patrick Willems, about why we don't have movie stars anymore. And he was kind of showcasing Ryan Reynolds and The Rock and how their careers are much more about creating themselves as brands and how those brands extend to different arenas rather than it being about how do I become an A-list movie star and build a movie career. It's like beyond that. And that's what I think about when I think about Tom Brady is he, until he signed that deal to become a broadcaster, I don't think anyone was under the assumption that he had any dreams of becoming a broadcaster. I think that was very much just a circumstance of opportunity. And I think it's just an extension of him building his brand. Like he's done with his playing career and now he has to kind of reestablish himself in the world. And being a broadcaster gives him an opportunity to keep his face in front of people and, be top of mind. And we're talking about him on a podcast. And but I don't think being a broadcaster is what he wants to do for the next 10, 20 years of his life. To your points, he's an owner now. He's got his own businesses. There's a million things he's involved with. And so I can't imagine he's a broadcaster longer than 3 years, I would say.
There's also there's conflicting reports about how involved he's going to be as a Raiders owner. Like I think Mike Florio has kind of downplayed it, but other people have said like, hey, Tom Brady's going to be really hands-on. And if it does get to the point where he's really hands-on, I think, and it becomes apparent he's really hands-on, I think that's like the true point of no return, because you saw it even with the Daniel Jones stuff. People are talking about that through the prism of him being an owner. Like, is he saying this to keep the players down? Is he saying this because he's pissed about it? I think once it becomes clear, like he is the Raiders co-owner and that's a big part of who Tom Brady is, I think at that point he can't be a broadcaster anymore.
I mean, if these owners and executives are getting freaking, trade calls from the guy, and then he's going on the next week and analyze, it's like they're gonna start chirping more than they already are. I think right now it's wait and see, and it kind of happened mid-season and everything else, but we'll have a whole off season of these guys. If he's like in Indianapolis for the draft, if he's at the Senior Bowl, it's gonna become pretty rough. And the point you make about acting, I think is a good one. There was actually the Pitchfork review, Sean, of the new Kendrick Lamar album made a similar point, and it got a lot of attention of like, this guy started his own production company. It has a big partnership with like Cash App and Amazon and all this crap. And like, was this just kind of something to like build the brand of Kendrick Lamar and whatever, more so than like a real art piece? I think there's a lot of people like that. It kind of makes me wonder about Dwayne Wade, honestly. What will he be if he does get one of these jobs? But that will be a conversation for a different day. I'm with Ben. I think it's one and done. I think that it has outlived its usefulness. I think being the guy to get a 10-year, $375 million contract was a hell of a way to build a brand. And even the headlines of that, he doesn't even really need that money probably. He can just kind of cruise and just let that sticker be stuck onto him more so than actually watch the paychecks coming in. But let's get to our stock watch. The media loves to pick a side. They love to... There is a news story. Where do I land on it? Give my take. Plant my flag on whatever end of the spectrum that I'm on. We at Awful Announcing cover the best and worst of those. we're going to zoom out one level further, and we are going to give our takes and plant our flags and analyze from a 30,000-foot view the takes being given. So if that's not meta enough, I don't know how better to explain it, but I think people are following me. It is the Stock Watch. Should I start us off, since this was my harebrained idea, and explain a little bit of what I'm thinking here?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a ton of football news. We're each going to pick three. We're each going to pick one thing. We're going to cover three. And mine is the Azeez Al-Shaair hit on Trevor Lawrence. All right. So Texans, Jaguars, Lawrence's first game back in a while. Their season's over. He was kind of questionable coming in, whatever, yada, yada. He, early in the game, he was playing poorly, slides on a run. Maybe slides a little late. You know, your opinions might differ on the exact physics of what happened in that moment. But Al-Shaair, who's known for being a very hard-hitting player, tackles him head-to-head. We see the fencing position by Lawrence, very clear right away that he has a head injury. His team comes to defend him. Afterward, the Texans defend Al-Shaair. The NFL suspends him. We don't know about Lawrence's status. Kind of the predictable way that a big, huge hit like that would be handled. But here's where I think our kind of analysis comes in, because none of us are, breaking down X's and O's of football or in locker rooms. Where the media has come out on this, right? And so what interests me about this one is, Ben, you and I talked when the Tua debate came up, right? My take then was the almost infantilization of Tua was a little weird. It was like, we know about concussions now, so here's what you should do, Mr. Tagovailoa, right? It's like, we've learned our lessons, and now, Avantes perfect later, we are ready to tell you how to handle your career. And this kind of felt similar to me. And it feels like we're kind of getting this course correction, this equilibrium on kind of like the hard hits, the brain trauma discussion. And the take that caught my attention the most was from Dominique Foxworth on his podcast, where he said, a hit like this is part of the game. It's within the confines of the rules to try and make your opponent feel pain. It's baked into the game. So if that was a half second earlier, the hit from Al-Shaair, we would have said nothing about it. He went on to say, the problem is, I think the difficult thing is we see guys hit the off switch earlier and earlier than they did in the past, and those things are hard to sort of legislate. Aaron Rodgers said something similar on the Pat McAfee show. Maybe there's something to the fact that those are both players, and maybe this is a player versus media thing here. But I think the more accurate read on it is actually that we're maybe veering a little bit more toward not the furthest, most, I don't mean this in a political way, but like liberal view of these hits, and like, let's outlaw them. There's no place for this. The most severe punishments, whatever, maybe where we might have been 7 years ago, to a little more of a realistic take when something like this happens. So that was kind of my read on it. Does it remind you of that Tua discussion, Ben? Am I right there to kind of connect the two?
Yeah, I think there's obviously a natural connection there, especially with the fencing posture making an appearance, which always seems to elevate these stories to kind of a different stratosphere in terms of the news cycle. I was surprised that the reaction, at least the overall reaction I have found, at least today, since the suspension first came out, which is a 3-game suspension, is that it's too harsh. And so, first of all, in terms of like your Dominique Foxworth take, in fair or not, and I think this is a part of having so many ex-players in the media, when I hear a defensive player defend the defensive player, like my mind just kind of tunes out, because I just think the take is too biased. So if he said something that came out like really strongly against Al-Shaair, then like that would have really caught my attention. But
what about Rodgers? Rodgers would be the guy that's getting his head blown off in that situation, right? I mean,
but who knows what he really thinks about, like, any of that stuff.
Anything.
Yeah. Exactly. So, he's another one. I'm probably not going to put too much stock into what he says regardless. But I was surprised, because I'm so used to my initial reaction was people were going to say this isn't strong enough. And I don't know if like Nick Caserio, the Texans general manager, he came out with a really strong press conference defending him, pointing out he's never been suspended. I think he said he's never been fined, although I don't know if that's right or not.
Even D'Amico Ryans, I mean, again, it's his coach,
Yeah.
but even he was like, before they knew what the consequences were, before they had heard any of the spin or anything, he was like, we're standing behind our guy, period.
So I guess I was surprised that it seems so unanimous that this is too harsh, because I'm so used to not only media, I mean, especially media erring on the side of safety, but these things are usually at least debatable, right? Like, we usually debate these things, and it just seems like it is a unanimous, like, oh, 3 games was way too much for this. For what was
Sean,
a pretty hit.
Do you think there's something to that? I mean, Ben's kind of pointing out, like, is this just because there's more players in the media, and that's where the equilibrium is coming from? Is that 7 years ago it was just like, the old talking heads kind of trying to find where they should be on this, and now there's players saying, hold on, let's be realistic here.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, I believe I saw Dan Le Batard also say, this is a game, kind of like what Foxworth was saying. This is a game where people are hurtling towards one another at full speed. Like, these things happen. And I think it kind of speaks to a larger conversation that I think the reason we're seeing such a shift on it, and this is, I could be pulling this out of my ass, but I'm extrapolating just based on listening to this conversation for the last 10, 15 years, that I think there's a larger conversation that we're really not willing to have about football, which is that this is a concussion causing sport. This is an injury causing sport. And so the best way to prevent things like this is to not play football and not support football. We collectively as a society have made it very clear we are not going to do that. We like football, whatever that says and means for us. And I say that as someone who has been a diehard college football fan my whole life and watches football. And so I think there's this dilemma that we have for ourselves. And again, I'm trying not to get too far out over my skis here, but, kind of like, the gun violence conversation and other like heavy conversations about us as a culture. It seems like there was that time period where we started taking concussions very seriously. And there was a lot of people saying the things, I think, Brendon, that you were talking about, where it was like, all right, Tua has to quit for the sake of his career, for the sake of his life. Like, he has to quit. And, this person gets a concussion, and like, we have to make changes, and we have to outlaw this, and we have to change that. And I think we've kind of gotten to the point now where we've seen those kind of cries fall on deaf ears, or just don't move. They don't do anything. It's almost weirdly like, well, now we know what it looks like when someone gets a concussion. We understand what's happening. We understand that hit we would have ideally liked it to have happened differently, but football is football, and it's happening in, milliseconds, and these things are going to happen. And we're not going to stop playing the game or watching the game because of it. So where's the energy behind having a big critique to it? And again, I don't know if I'm getting like too, I'm extrapolating too much out of this.
I think you're right. I mean, I do think like the awareness of the inherent violence stuff like that I do think is affected by there being more player voices than there were when this conversation maybe hit a fever pitch again, like maybe 5 to 10 years ago, whatever you want to say. People just sort of being able to own the position of like, somebody like Dominic Foxworth, brilliant guy, the idea that he didn't know what he was getting himself into, or whatever kind of like insensitive takes you could try to put on football players, is not true of him. It's not true of most people. The more of these voices we hear, we're like, no, these guys had every kind of awareness. Chris Long, I think, talks about it very well. And there's a lot of players that kind of weigh in on this stuff that I think do a good job of being like, yeah, we knew what we were getting into. We were fine with it, and fingers crossed, right? I've even heard Mike Golick talk about it, and he played before any of this was even, really a conversation. So maybe it's kind of a combination of all of these things, but I've just been kind of fascinated by whether it's Damar Hamlin, Tua, the more and more instances we've had kind of over the past couple of years, there's definitely been a little bit of a change up. All right, Ben, where are we going next?
We are going to go to the world of college football. We're going to go to my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, where the Ohio State Buckeyes lost their fourth consecutive rivalry game to, I call them Michigan. I don't call them like that team up north or cross out the M in Benjamin or anything like that. But so Ohio State lost to Michigan, and it's created this dilemma, especially considering it was such a bad Michigan team. I mean, they were 6-5 entering the game, probably the worst Michigan team in a couple of decades. And there have been some bad ones, but this is an Ohio State team that was, I think, favored to win the national title entering this game. And so, whereas Ohio State's lost these three previous games, you could always point to the fact that Michigan was good teams. I think they went to the playoff in each of the 3 years they beat Ohio State. And so there was always that caveat, but now Ohio State has a Ryan Day problem. And I don't mean that in terms of Ohio State should fire him, although I have my own thoughts on the matter. But there's definitely this perception that Ryan Day cannot beat Michigan. And so it's led to, I think, and we'll talk about this with Sean's, like it's interesting the way that coach firings and coach hot seats get enter the discourse, I guess. And so it's like a year ago, if I would have said Ohio State's should fire Ryan Day, that would have seemed pretty crazy. He's like 66-10 overall, regardless of what his record is against Michigan. Ohio State's still going to be in the college football playoff this year because it expanded to 12 teams. And so a year ago, the conversation seemed crazy. Well, this year it seems a little less crazy because now he's lost to a bad Michigan team. It was a really, really ugly, like brutal loss that of all the, you can watch football and you can say like, I blame the quarterback. I blame the defense. I blame the head coach. This one felt squarely on the head coach. And so come Monday morning, like that was a natural talking point on all the talk shows is should Ohio State fire Ryan Day? And so I thought what was interesting about the conversation is that people who don't follow college football all that closely still think it's a crazy conversation. And the people who do follow college football pretty closely, they don't only think it's a real conversation. They kind of seem to think that Ohio State should fire Ryan Day. So I found that dynamic really interesting, where you have, guys like Dan Lebitard and Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon saying, this is crazy. His record 66-10. How could you fire this guy? And then you have guys like Paul Feinbaum and Colin Cowherd, although we can debate how much Colin Cowherd knows about college football after what he said about USC over the weekend. But you have them saying, like, Ohio State probably should fire Ryan Day. And so, like, I don't know. First of all, where do you guys come out on this? Because I know you both are college football fans, but you're not Ohio State fans like I am. Like, do you think this is a crazy conversation?
I'll say I am always a be careful what you wish for person when it comes to firing coaches. I'm dating myself here, but I remember when Nebraska fired what's his name? The guy after Osborne who went he was like 10-2, like 11-1.
Bill Callahan?
No, it was the guy who he coached at Ohio for like 15
Frank
years.
Solich.
Frank Solich, yeah. So they fired Solich because he was slightly less successful than Osborne. And then you just look at the trajectory of Nebraska football from that point forward. Obviously, there are examples that are very different to that, but I don't know. As someone, as a Syracuse fan, so someone who understands the value of sticking with the hot hand, I can appreciate the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry and the importance of that. And I think it's really cool. It's one of the few things that we are still holding on to traditionally in college football these days. And I appreciate that hatred is there. But I just have such a hard time. It's such all right, like if you're going to fire this guy, the next guy better be Urban Meyer 2.0, or else, it makes such an assumption that Ohio State is just guaranteed to be a national title contender every year, no matter what, which you don't have to go that far back to see Ohio. That's not true. So that's my take.
What do you think? Do you think this? Am I just an insane Buckeye fan, Brendon? I mean, I
Maybe.
am,
I mean, I think my mind goes the same place as Sean, sort of, which is that I think that some of this is just a byproduct of the intensity of this rivalry, right? Like, I don't think it's a far jump to think of the way the Jim Harbaugh narrative played out, right? I mean, it was like that's the reason he was going to get fired. He led up like what was like almost 120 points over 2 years right before the pandemic in those two games, and then finally beats them in 2021, I think. So it's like, I mean, some of that maybe is being the little brother, and maybe that's why he got more leash, and it was inevitable that if a coach on the other side started to slip, that the hammer would come down a little bit harder. I think it's just the stakes of what, honestly, it kind of reminds me of it's not a first year coach or anything, but like what Gerard Mayo is dealing with in New England a little bit, where it's just like the stakes become so outsized that it's like he's a first-year coach with a terrible roster, and I know Ohio State was the favorite. I understand that is the difference, but I just think the coverage of Gerard Mayo has been so harsh, where it's like, I just think if you're the big brother, the big bad wolf, the dynasty, and you slip, the guy who is deemed to be the kind of reason for that, or the figurehead of it at the very least, kind of is going to bear the brunt of it. But I do think the idea of coach hot seats and media is, I mean, it's almost entirely caused by media. It's like that's just all that it is, in my opinion.
Well, I think that's kind of another interesting angle to all of this, is that the national media is at least turning on Ryan Day. Like this is now becoming a conversation that's coming up on debate shows. Whenever Ohio State's playing in the playoff game, this will be a conversation that surrounds it. The local media, though, has not really shifted. Like the local media is still defending Ryan Day. I don't know if that's an access thing. I don't know if that's a college football thing. But the local media is still like in like a pro Ryan Day camp. And so
if that's true, then he's safe, right? I mean, are they going to let, people on ESPN make the decision?
I don't think it's necessarily reflective of the fan base. And so I think the two wild cards of this are going to be boosters and how they feel about it, and how Ryan Day feels about it, because he seems miserable in this job. Like, I don't know if you guys saw that clip from the coach's show last week where he was saying like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to his family, him losing to Michigan. And he was likening it to his father dying when he was a child. Like, he seems miserable. Like, this is not a good job for him, I don't think. And so
the clip of him dazed during the fight was saying what happened. It was like, check on him, please. Somebody
I almost
get him
wonder
some medical attention.
If it's to your point, does the national sports media overrate the Ohio State Michigan thing versus go ahead.
I think they get it right. I think they're the ones, just as somebody who grew up in it. Like, I think like Ohio State could still win the national title. And I'll tell you right now, there are fans who would rather have beaten Michigan than win the national title. I'd actually say that to most fans. And so like, it's just like having grown up in it. And I grew up during the John Cooper years where every year was like this one, where Ohio State comes into it to the favorite and they find a way to lose in embarrassing fashion. I went to school during the Jim Tressel years, and so Ohio State's just dominating the rivalry. I covered Ohio State during the Urban Meyer years where they're dominating the rivalry, and now it's just all flipped again. And so like, there's just this intensity in this rivalry where even if Ohio State wins the national title this year, there's going to be an asterisk on this season for a lot of Ohio State fans, and this team will never be as beloved as the 2002 or 2014 team. And so it's I don't know why the national media seems to get that part of it like right. And maybe that's just unique to like guys like Paul Feinbaum and Colin Cowherd who are steeped in some of this stuff. But I do think the national media actually gets it right.
So maybe the point is, even though you literally said they could win the national title and people would still not be happy, it becomes a question of, can Ryan Day keep sending Ohio State to the playoff? And what happens that one year he doesn't when they lose to Michigan? And that, to me, is kind of like, all right, now we have our reason.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's to that point, his record, again, it's 66-10. He's never had like a truly embarrassing loss to a team Ohio State had no business losing to, other than this Michigan team. But Ohio State almost lost to Nebraska this year. And oh boy, like that, you would have seen calls for his firing had they lost to Nebraska. So I think you're right. Like, I think everyone's kind of there, and there's just enough to still justify keeping him in terms of making the playoff for a lot of people. And so I think that's another interesting angle to all of this is, now that the playoff has expanded to 12 teams, are we just going to see like less high profile firings? Because logistically, Ohio State could not fire Ryan Day right now when they're getting ready to conceivably compete for a national title. But I've rambled on this long enough. Brendon, do we want to touch on like the fights or anything? Because that was a pretty big topic too.
I mean, we do have Sean's stock watch to get to.
Okay, let's skip it. We'll pause at that.
Well, let's stop talking about this.
Let's hope more college football teams fight each other next week, and then we'll return to it, Ben.
Army,
Navy. Talk about an NFL coach firing.
Okay, let's do it.
So I was on shift during the Bears-Packers game, and so I was watching in real time as
Bears-Lions.
Sorry, Bears-Lions. I was watching in real time as the Bears completely blew, their opportunity to, at the very least, tie that game and send it to overtime versus potentially win it. Through terrible clock management. And, it was one thing to watch social media kind of universally rally around like, oh my God, what are they doing? What is Matt Eberflus doing? This is crazy. I can't believe he's not calling timeout. I can't believe they're wasting this. That happens. And that's pretty normal. What was really surprising to me in a way, I mean, I watched members of the sports media also universally call this out. And that in and of itself is also nothing special. What was really kind of like eye-opening to me was watching in real time how many people in the sports media were effectively calling for Matt Eberflus to be fired right then and there. In the moments and the minutes after that game was over, there were multiple people just coming out and saying that is a fireable series of events. That there's no way Matt Eberflus should make it to Sunday. Even the people who were being kinder, even the people who were just talking about how terrible the sequence was, were still kind of alluding to the idea that surely this guy cannot continue being the coach of this team. And I was just really struck by it. Because I was on X, I was over on Blue Sky, and it was just universal. Everybody was just there was not a person working in sports media that I saw who wasn't either saying this is one of the worst sequences I've ever seen in my life, or this guy needs to be fired right now. And so I don't know. I was just really struck by it. And it kind of speaking to what you were just talking about, Ben, about the role that the sports media can play in that narrative, because fast forward then to Friday, Eberflus is doing his morning press conference. By all accounts, if he's still doing the press conference, he's still the coach. He's presumably going to be the coach through, this week or whatever. And then the Bears make that decision. And it was almost kind of like sports media collectively forced, even if it was just kind of through narrative or through sheer will, they forced the Bears to do the right thing, or what is presumably the right thing, in spite of themselves, because they are the Chicago Bears and they're so they have this history of just making, the wrong decision or just waiting too long or all this stuff. And I don't know, it was really just fascinating to watch it all play out, because it was kind of you almost wonder if that reaction wasn't there and it wasn't so intense and so universal, is he still the coach?
Or if it wasn't on Thanksgiving even, maybe, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. So spotlit. Yeah.
Yeah. If that was a 1 p.m. on a Sunday, overshadowed by, 5 other games, maybe it doesn't get, it was just a real perfect storm of that happening.
I think perfect storm is the perfect phrase for it, because the mistake was so egregious And 2, it was a head coach with like no credibility, like somebody we all think's probably getting fired at the end of the season anyways. And so like if this was Mike Tomlin, obviously you're not going to fire him for one mistake. I almost wonder, like, had the Bears just gotten blown out on Thursday, like everybody expected them to, like if Matt Eberflus keeps his job. But the mistake was so egregious that it felt like, okay, this is a coach with no credibility, like he's got to go. But I thought the other funny part was, so all the media is calling for his job, and then the Bears do fire him after letting him do his press conference. And the reaction from the media is, wait, you can't fire him after he does his press conference. So it was this whole 12-hour window of fire him. Then the Bears fire him. And it's, wait, not like that. You can't fire him like that.
Like somehow they had all the wind at their backs and they still made it. Everybody was like mad at them.
Right. Only the Bears.
I think this one was just so easy that the media like unanimously tearing them apart was predictable. I mean, we wrote something on Matt Ryan doing it, and there were all sorts of different it was universal. And so when it gets like that, plus I think like we were talking about, what if there was a season where Ryan Day did slip up along the way and the Michigan loss was like the kicker on a frustrating season rather than just a slip up. And it's kind of what this season has been like for the Bears. I mean, the Bears are no Ohio State, but this was the culmination. They already moved on from their offensive coordinator. They're ruining their number 1 overall draft pick. As Sean mentioned, they are the Bears, which is a reason in and of itself to doubt them. And this one was just sort of like, it almost felt like you said, put them out of their misery. Like, please, Hallis family, can we please do something about the situation, right? And they finally did. So, yeah, when a first-year studio guy and cranky guys on ESPN's afternoon shows and everybody, like when Michael Wilbon was asked about it on PTI on Monday, he was like, it was time. Like he just sort of gently was like, yeah, we were there. Like it was like too much at that point, too like much pile on of Eberflus.
Yeah, it was like the media almost like it was having an intervention with the Bears of like,
yes,
like you just can't continue to be who you are. Like you need to do this.
Do something different. Please do not ruin the one quarterback we have ever had.
Right.
All right. I think we did well on that segment. I think it came together the way that I was hoping. Stock watch. We'll have to come back to it. All right. Hot mics to close ourselves out here. Sean will join us for our topic du jour, something that caught our attention. We liked, we disliked, we hyped up, we hated, whatever the case may be. Ben, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, my guy, John Stugotz Wiener, published a book, Stugotz's personal record book, which has been a long-running inside joke on the Dan Le Batard show. I believe it was born out of Stugotz's belief that Kevin Durant's 2 rings with the Golden State Warriors don't count. And so he kind of created a long-running list of his personal record book, what he believes to be the facts of sports history. They turned it into a book. Dan Stanzik, I believe, is the other byline on it. He's a podcast producer at ESPN. They got a bunch of people from the sports media space to contribute to it. And the most amazing part is that it got done because Stugotz is a notorious procrastinator. The Dan Le Batard show is notorious for its procrastination. I pre-ordered this book probably close to a year ago, probably 10 months ago, forgot about it. Then I started to see other people getting theirs in the mail a couple of weeks ago and thought there's no way I'm getting this book. Like I ordered this directly from Stugotz. This is some sort of scheme. Lo and behold, I got my book autographed in Stugotz fashion, came with a bookworm bookmark. And so, just pretty amazing that the Dan Le Batard show is Stugotz and Stugotz himself got this done.
Have you read any of it?
No, God, no.
Okay. 10 months from now, we'll check in.
In true Stugotz fashion, I am, I'll read it at some point. I'm getting to it.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't buy it because I honestly need somebody to tell me if it's a good book. I'm cheap, I guess.
Once I upgrade my podcasting background, it will be on the shelf there. When I have my shelf of books, it will be Bill Simmons' book of basketball and Stugotz's personal record book.
Your AJ Hawk disheveled bookshelf with no spines out, just generic pages of books behind him. That's the AJ Hawk. All right, I'll go here quickly. Mine is Twitch streamer Kai Cenat. His 24/7 all throughout November subathon. The numbers are just insane. I mean, we talk about like ratings and stuff for sports games, obviously, all the time on Awful Announcing. This thing was wild. I mean, he was at 80,000+ basically throughout all of November. When he was actually talking on stream, which was in evenings into nights, he would clear 230,000 easy live viewers. And the goal was to pass 337,000 subs on Twitch. He did that in 11 days. He is at 738,000 now, which is more than double the last record. Like, this is one of the biggest entertainers in the world by all these numbers. And he had a sports tie-in. People like Serena Williams, Andre Iguodala, Kyrie Irving, not a sports figure, but Bill Nye the Science Guy also participated in this live stream. To me, what's interesting about this and those folks' involvement in it and numerous other sports figures that he has pulled in. Kai also did a like full basketball league this past summer where it was like teams of different content creators. They did it like a real broadcast. They hired people. They had Nick Wright do like commercials and promos for it and all this sort of stuff. It's this niche of sports content that has nothing to do with sports. You know, like there's tons of people who watch this who don't know Serena Williams as anything other than that girl who was on Kai's stream, right? Like that. And that was probably partially true at various points in history. If they went on a talk show or they did a guest appearance on some kid's like Nickelodeon TV show or something. Like, I'm not trying to say that this is fully new, but it's just fascinating to me that there's more and more ways that are just kind of like this tangential connection to stuff that maybe us older folks care about or that matters in a traditional way, that younger audiences are just kind of consuming 2-3 steps removed in this whole other format. I get the idea of somebody like Kyrie Irving going on it to deliver to his audience, but I just have a hard time. That's not going to become Mavs watchers, Mavs fans. Like that's not what this is. So I don't have a full read on it because it is still a fairly new kind of, medium here. But I was just sitting there wondering, what is the value to these people of coming on this thing? And what are the fans watching going to kind of do with that relationship to the athlete or the sports figure that they're kind of consuming in this disjointed way? So I don't know if you guys have thoughts. I doubt you watched it at all, but that was what I was chewing on this week.
Well, I wonder if it ties into that conversation we were having about personal brand and how that's kind of the new currency for a lot of people, celebrities and people like that.
Yeah,
but
that's where my mind went with it.
Yeah, I agree, but like, what happens when like Kyrie Irving, he already is an NBA star. Like this is another thing for him. But as we kind of move forward, it's like when it's not just let me go on there for some attention or a different kind of fan base, and it's like it just is the thing. We're a long way from that, but that was kind of where I was thinking, because this was a massive thing for, I think, a lot of people who we don't talk about, except for when we say the kids don't like sports, and then we talk about it. And you know what I mean? Like, this was kind of, I think, an example of, well, they do, but just in a very, very different way. And how do you bridge that gap? That's not my pay grade to figure out. Somebody at ESPN can be dealing with all that, but fascinating anyway. Sean, you got one for us?
Yeah, before I get into it, I should note, as we are recording this podcast, Tom Brady is appearing on Colin Cowherd's show. His second appearance of the year. So just nobody call us out on that. Fox has figured out how to get their money's worth. They're all set.
He heard me and he said, watch
this.
Like,
all right, we got to go.
Yeah.
So for mine, we were talking about Ryan Day and Ohio State and what they can do to beat Michigan. One thing I wanted to suggest for Ohio State is maybe look into getting a quarterback like, say, Kyle McCord. I don't know if you've heard of him, the Syracuse phenom. Guy like might be good for a guy like that to be on Ohio State's roster. That could be a game changer for you. But he is the quarterback of the Syracuse Orange, who are 9-3. Fantastic first year for head coach Fran Brown. And I don't bring this up just because I'm a Syracuse fan. I bring it up because Fran Brown came to Syracuse highly recommended by Kirby Smart and other very notable coaches. He's been known as an amazing recruiter. And what he really has been is an amazing media presence and soundbite maker. He has really stepped into that role. And I think that is the kind of thing that is gold for a program like Syracuse. If his predecessor, Dino Babers, he unfortunately kind of fell off over the course of his coaching career there. But in the beginning, when he had that big upset over Clemson, what people remember is not the upset. They remember his speech in the locker room afterwards and how, excited the players were. And it was this viral moment. And, that is kind of a currency that a program like Syracuse desperately needs. And so Fran Brown, from his opening press conference when he was hired to the press conferences where he talked about how he doesn't shower after losses. And now every time after they win, he talks about how he's going to go get washed. And he's like calling out, Ryan Day. And he's, telling Dabo Swinney, like, you're welcome for getting you in the ACC championship game. And he's just a natural. He's just like one of these people, super charismatic. It's a real pleasure as a Syracuse fan to see somebody like that. And, we'll see how long it lasts. As a Syracuse fan, I know full well what happens when you get a really good football coach. Usually they become somebody else's football coach very quickly. So we'll see how long the Fran Brown era lasts at Syracuse. But I think he knows how to play the game. And I just wanted to give some kudos to him as he really has made his mark in one season there so far.
He might be Ohio State's football coach.
I mean, don't put it past him. Give it another year.
We gave you a quarterback. We'll take your head coach.
We'll take the coach. Yeah.
Keep talking.
I don't know if I want to call ASU's coach charismatic, but he is a legitimate lunatic, and he's like, 5 years older than me. So I've very much enjoyed that experience. And it sounds like he's not going to be anybody else's football coach. So I get to enjoy that for a little while longer. But yeah, Ben, you called me a college football fan earlier in the show. I really appreciate the compliment. I don't know if I qualify, but this year, certainly when your team gets picked to finish 16 of 18 and suddenly they're in the Big 12 championship game, it's I was pulled onto the bandwagon, and I'll sit here. I have my ASU shirt on. I'm feeling the energy, and then we'll just get blown out by 4 touchdowns in like 2 weeks, and the ride will end. But I'll have enjoyed it.
If Arizona State is in the Big 12, even if it is your alma mater, to me, you're a college football fan.
Okay, great, nice. I can put that on the resume. I did it. All right, guys. Thank you to Sean. This was a great first appearance. The resident Pat McAfee expert as well. Well, maybe the next time we talk about Pat, we'll have to circle back with Sean. I mean, it's also getting very close to Aaron Rodgers' podcast season. We're like 2-3 months from that. So Sean will be listening to those and breaking those down for us as well. But
getting my transcription tools ready.
Exactly. Yeah. Some AI assistance might be necessary. Don't forget to check out awfulannouncing.com where all those beautiful podcast transcriptions lie, as well as up-to-the-minute news on all things sports media. We're all across social media as well, folks. We're also right here for you on the play-by-play once a week on Wednesdays. So check us out, and we'll talk to you next time.